Yeah, well, I'm pretty much perpetually in the studio. I'm always in a few times a week. I'm doing a lot of session work for independent producers. There's the never-ending succession of demos by singers and bands who want to recapture the sound that we created back in the day. So that kind of work keeps me busy, and I'm doing some soundtrack stuff. I don't know if you've been to my website or not. Music on the opening page, the piano piece. Yeah, that's one of several themes that I composed for what promises to be a Pixar animated feature, if it ever gets made. I mean, that's been in the works for a few years now, and I'm beginning to lose a little bit of confidence in the possibility of it ever actually coming to fruition. But as a result of that, there's been some other film work, mind you, not on the level of Pixar, but whatever it takes to pay the bills.
And we have to pay the bills sometimes.
Unfortunately, pretty much every time.
Saturday, it was Ronnie James Dio's memorial.
So the funeral was on Friday. I'm sorry, on Saturday.
Saturday.
And on Friday was a very intimate gathering for a viewing at the church. And then, of course, Sunday was the public memorial, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah.
Actually, your part of the world was very well represented because there were many, many, many Canadians who were in attendance. Well, I'll tell you, Dio fans are the best in the world. They're just they're relentless. They're hardcore. They're loyal. They're faithful, and they never stop showing up, which is a wonderful thing to be able to say about one's fans.
It hurt a lot of people, when we heard the news, that Dio had passed, and it reached throughout the world. Now, I'm sure you've got, a lot of great things to say about Ronnie James Dio because there's like nothing negative to say. Isn't that right?
That's true. That is true. I mean, there are always those who will find it negative to say, and I suspect you could probably, find negative to say about everyone from Moses to Mother Teresa. But it's always about, to me anyway, it's always about the perspective. If you say that someone is overly critical, for example, you can't make that criticism without an observation of the result of that criticism being a phenomenal body of work. If you say that Mother Teresa gave too much time and didn't spend time with her family, then you have to consider that she helped millions of people.
Mm.
You see what I mean? Everything is always a double-edged sword.
Right.
So the thing about Ronnie, though, is that he was remarkably, and of course it's only more evident now than ever, now that he's no longer with us, is that he was remarkably consistent in his work, in his work ethic, in his beliefs, in his friendships, and in pretty much everything he did.
Now, how did you join, Dio back, in what, 83, 84?
It was actually 83 when I started playing with Dio, but I had actually been working with Ronnie for a year or two prior to that. I used to have a long since forgotten band called Rough Cutt.
Okay.
Which I had started with a bunch of friends and fellow musicians, including Jakey Lee.
California-based Rough Cutt.
That's correct. Yeah, I understand there was another one in Western New York or something, if I'm not mistaken. But no, we were the L.A. Rough Cutt, and when we were looking for management, it coincided with Wendy Ronnie's widow now, having embarked upon starting a management company, a company called Niji Management. And we did a showcase for Wendy, and at the time her partner, a gal by the name of Patty Stein, who was the wife of legendary keyboardist Mark Stein of Vanilla Fudge fame. And they came down to our showcase at SIR Studios here in Hollywood. And as if we weren't nervous enough about the showcase for management, with them walked in Ronnie Dio, Wendy's husband, and Mark Stein, Patty's husband, the keyboardist for Vanilla Fudge. So that raised the stress level just a little bit. But apparently we played well enough because they took us on immediately, and Ronnie made everyone feel instantly at ease. So before we had a chance to decide how we would approach him and introduce ourselves, he leapt up off the couch and came up on the stage and introduced himself and started shaking everyone's hand and complimenting us on what a good job we had done, and just a very, very gracious gentleman. Just really a lovely, lovely man.
And like that, there's not much people that would take the time to do what Ronnie would have done there.
Number one, you're absolutely correct. There aren't many people. There aren't many people. Number one, who would take the time to do that in the first place. Number two, there are even fewer people of Ronnie's stature who could be bothered with some unknown aspiring local, because L.A. in the '80s was literally littered with aspiring bands. Everybody and their brother who had a guitar and an amp wanted to be a rock star. But for Ronnie to actually come down was already above and beyond anybody's wildest expectations. And then on top of that, to be the gentleman and be the gracious individual that he was, just put it over the top. It was really dream come true territory.
You would have seen him being the front man of Black Sabbath, right in those days, like he would have been finished with it, but just, the mob rules singer.
That's correct. That's correct. And Heaven and Hell, more to the point, which for me was just such a landmark album. Because the thing is, I guess I'm old enough to go back to Deep Purple being my really strong, influential band when I was a kid cutting my teeth. And, I've spent countless hours listening to every note that John Lord ever played on any Purple album and figuring out how he did this and how he did that. And, of course, with the Purple connection, when Purple kind of disbanded, or at least when Ritchie left to form Rainbow, then all of a sudden, by proxy, I became a fan of Ronnie's as well. And I remember listening to those albums with the same critical ear that I listened to the Purple albums. And, of course, never to be disappointed, because those were landmark albums as well. So I was a fan of Ronnie's going back to probably 75, I would guess.
Right, the beginning of Rainbow.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
I was just a vision back then.
Yeah. And actually, it was especially the Rainbow Rising album with Tony Carey's wonderful keyboard work that really sealed the deal for me.
For sure. And
I mean, the first album with Man on Silver Mountain and everything was wonderful, but it was really that Rainbow Rising album with Tara Woman and Starstruck and
Light in the Black. I'm sure that got you out.
Now you're talking. Sure.
Yeah, that is a song.
Like I said, that whole album was just fantastic.
For sure.
Fantastic. Hey, Jason, how you doing, man?
Good again.
I was telling you how what a dream come true it was to wind up working with Ronnie after having been a fan of his from the early Rainbow work. But I suppose I also should add that prior to, I realize this is focusing on Ronnie, but prior to playing with Dio, I played with Hughes Thrall, with Glenn Hughes.
Okay.
And of course, I was a fan of Glenn Hughes from the Purple days as well. So that also was something of a full circle being reached. Having listened to both Glenn and Ronnie, and of course, the irony of irony isn't the right word, but the significance of them being reunited this past weekend, with one of them unfortunately no longer being with us, was very, very moving for me. And perhaps you've seen some of the YouTube videos of the memorial on Sunday, but the closing musical piece was Glenn singing, which was just, as always, just brilliant.
With all the YouTube footage, starting to, go on the internet, the fans must have just, be filming everything, most likely.
Yeah, actually, I haven't had the chance to really do much looking myself, but my webmaster at ClaudeSchnell.com has been keeping me posted of things that he's been finding. But I understand it's if you just go on YouTube and search under Dio Memorial, you'll pretty much find basically pages and pages of user videos that were shot with either handheld cameras or cell phones or whatever. But I understand there is an awful lot of material on YouTube to be seen regarding the Dio Memorial, as there well should be. Because
for sure.
Was quite just as an observer, in addition to someone who actually performed there, I thought it was a brilliantly executed production. Wendy Dio did an amazing job, Wendy and her staff, of putting this together and organizing everything. And not to mention the creation of the Stand Up and Shout charity, which I'm guessing by now you've heard of. A couple of days after Ronnie's passing, Wendy set out to create a charitable research fund for cancer research, and it's called Stand Up and Shout, and Wendy was involved with that mere days after Ronnie's passing. Lesser woman would have been caving under the pressure of the emotional distress and all of the logistics of arranging the funeral and the memorial and everything else. Wendy took the high road and, looking at the bigger picture, had the wherewithal to stop and create this charitable foundation, which I think is something that Ronnie will be eternally remembered for and would be enormously proud of her for having done.
Thing they're doing right now also that I think is great is they're offering a T-shirt also for with donations.
Yeah, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, 100% of the purchase price of the T-shirt gets contributed to the charitable fund.
Okay.
Yeah. The T-shirt is related to this the Stand Up and Shout Foundation.
Okay, then I've seen that.
They were selling them as early as Sunday at the memorial.
You think with all this, going down now, that there's going to be some new focus on the brand new DVD, perhaps like a documentary on Ronnie James Dio in the near future?
I would certainly hope so, and I think the timing would be extraordinary. There certainly is the body of work and a career busting at the seams worth of material. If nothing else, just the. I was entertained, and I've known the man for almost 30 years, with the video clips that were shown of his early Elf days of playing in bars in upstate New York, and just as his career had progressed. There was one of the gentlemen who got up and spoke was a dear old friend of the band who used to work. Actually, he started out as John Lord's roadie back in the Purple days. A guy by the name of Willie Fife, who was talking about the first time he ever saw Ronnie was when Elf went on stage for the first time to open for Purple, and of course all the crew members were anxiously watching from the wings of the stage, and were instantly transfixed on how these 5 relatively diminutive guys could come out and just kick everybody's ass. And as Willie said in his eulogy, he saw 5 elves walk up on stage, only 4 came off, and 1 giant. And of course the giant was Ronnie.
And he was a giant with a voice.
Exactly. That's the point. And that was clearly the pivotal turning point for the next chapter of his career, moving on from Elf and the eventual creation of Rainbow with Ritchie Blackmore.
Now, did you ever see Ronnie James Dio blow up microphones on stage, like singing so loud? I've heard about it. Is it true that his voice would have been so loud that it would, crack the diaphragm on the microphone?
I've seen microphones go bad, but I've never experienced. I don't believe anyone's voice is physically powerful enough to blow out a diaphragm. A diaphragm is a relatively, it's very, very thin, but it's still a few microns thick. It has some mass to it. Piece of plastic, a synthetic, relatively strong material. Voice at its absolute maximum is just the movement of air. So to be able to physically, what's the word I'm looking for? To physically destroy or even damage.
Damage it, yeah.
It shouldn't have been that hard to think of. To physically damage a piece of plastic with one's voice is a very difficult concept to imagine. Now, that being said, microphones wear out.
Right.
After just from the change in temperatures, from being thrown around, from being in the cold trucks as we're driving to the hot stage lights during the day, the diaphragm eventually gets brittle, and in which case it wouldn't take a voice as great as Ronnie's to blow it out. So, it makes a great urban legend to think of someone's voice being so powerful that it tears up microphones. But I think that's more just urban legend than it is anything really related to the strength of one's voice. That being said, I've never heard anyone with a voice as strong as Ronnie's.
And going to the recording studios with Ronnie James Dio, how good was it to watch him in performance, on the albums?
It is absolutely indescribable to try to explain what watching Ronnie in the studio is. I'm sure you and your listeners have heard the countless tales of how difficult Ronnie is to work with and what a taskmaster he is and what a perfectionist. And I remember there were stories circulating about problems he had with Sabbath because he'd go back into the studio and redo the mix and all kinds of nonsense that may or may not have been true. But I'll tell you this firsthand as someone who spent countless hours in the studio with Ronnie. I've never seen anyone as dedicated, as focused, and as professional as Ronnie James Dio the minute he walks into the studio, or really any endeavor. I mean, Ronnie's equally professional when he's on stage or when he's with the fans. He's the embodiment of everything you want as a fan, everything you want your heroes to be. But in the studio, the level of commitment that he has to his performance, to the execution of that performance, there is absolutely no compromise. And keyboard players were kind of known as being a little bit of an obsessive bunch, probably because we spent so much time practicing as kids. But in my own career and in my own life, I strive to be as good as I can be and get things as close to perfection as possible. Singers aren't necessarily known for that, because sometimes I think they tend to be a little too egocentric. But Ronnie broke that mold. He would subject himself to a standard higher than he would subject any of the rest of us, and that's saying something.
Also, Ronnie, picked out some of the best guitar players the world has ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he has.
Was that just a coincidence, or did he just how to pick out the guys?
Yeah, that would be a coincidence, like somebody picking the lotto numbers every single week. No, there's no coincidence there at all. Again, this all speaks to Ronnie's incredibly high standards, the ridiculous level of the tuning of his ears. Ronnie knew in his head from day one what he wanted his band to sound like. He knew who the guitar players who could fit that bill would be and set out to find them, even if they weren't in front of him at the time. It's kind of like, I suppose, setting your sights on an imaginary woman who would be the exact thing that you'd want to find, and then one day you're lucky enough to actually stumble upon somebody who fits that description. Before you even speak to them that they're going to be the ones to fit that bill. Similarly, when Ronnie found the guitar players who he's been known to find, he already knew how the projects would turn out. Mm-hmm. Again, he had an amazing. I mean, everybody knows Ronnie the singer. To a less degree, they know Ronnie the producer. But I'm telling you, all of that pales in comparison to Ronnie the musician, because as Ronnie the musician, he embodied all of it. Not only the vocal, not only the production, but everything in between.
Most likely, he had perfect pitch and knew exactly, everything.
Actually, he didn't have perfect pitch. That was something we joked about quite often. He had perfect relative pitch, which is already pretty good, which most astute musicians can claim. But perfect pitch, and there are debates about this, but some seem to feel that you have to be born with that or you don't have it. Mm. Actually, you asked me earlier what I was doing these days. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that for the past couple of years I've been teaching at the Musicians Institute here in Los Angeles. And I actually have a student who has perfect pitch, which is just mind-blowing from a teaching standpoint to see the things that this guy is capable of simply by virtue of the fact that, he hears notes in their pristine form without the need for any relative note to figure out what the pitch relation is. But no, Ronnie didn't have perfect pitch. He had perfect relative pitch, and more importantly, he knew he had a very well-tuned sonic palette. Mm-hmm. He knew what he was capable of. He knew what he wanted his bands or any of his projects to sound like, and he was able to create an image consistent with that desire.
How would you say how rare perfect pitch is? You're saying that one of your students does have it. How rare is it?
I've known over the years, and I've been around a while, I've probably known half a dozen people who've had perfect pitch. It's pretty rare. You probably could very, very easily do a Google search and find out how rare it is. A lot of people think they have perfect pitch, and then then they're tested and find out that maybe I thought I had it and I didn't. I tried perfecting my own pitch for years by every day listening to the exact same tone before I woke up. I mean, once I woke up and before I went to sleep, and I was able to retain a vague notion, so I was within 50 cents of the note. If you're familiar, there's 100 cents of increment between every half step. But people with perfect pitch never have to think about it. It's just bam, it's there. This student to whom I'm referring, he was telling me the way he discovered he had perfect pitch was when he was a child in music class. The teacher played a note on the piano and wrote a scale on the blackboard. The note that the teacher played was a C. The scale on the blackboard was G, and this student of mine was able. He sensed that something was wrong. He realized that the pitch he was hearing was not the same as the scale that was being written on the blackboard.
Wow.
Which I know. I was just. What do you say to that? I mean, it's just an incredible gift to have.
And who is this great gifted guy?
His name is Keith Hetrick. He's a keyboard student at Musicians Institute. I think he shows tremendous promise. He's going to do a lot of beat-based stuff. He's doing a lot of songs for contract to some pop artists now. But he's a name I think we should all be aware of, because I'd be very surprised if he doesn't turn into like an enormous producer in the very near future.
Wow.
Not at all anything to do with our hard rock tastes. Unfortunately, I've tried to educate him a little bit about the dark side, as it were. Mm-hmm. People's tastes are what people's tastes are. So if somebody isn't into our style of stuff, no amount of convincing is going to get them into it. I think it has to be something visceral. People who are into metal, people who are into rock, are into it because we feel it in our bones. We feel it in our most intimate of organs.
Right.
And guys who don't get it just don't get it.
Let me go back here for a second. You mentioned earlier when I talked to you that you're, founding member of Rough Cutt.
Yep.
With Jake E. Lee. When's the last time you seen Jake E. Lee?
The last time I saw Jake, wow, I couldn't tell you. It's been, oh my. I think the last time I actually saw him might have been when he was still with Ozzy. And I think we got together in London for a beer at a pub. Oh, you know what? Maybe not. I think he was at there was a Monsters of Rock at which we were playing. I believe Motley Crue was on that bill as well. So it might have been like 86 or 87. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's a story in the Motley Crue coffee table book about how the bed in my hotel room wound up going through the window, through the hood of a Mercedes parked below. The Motley Crue book I don't believe, gives credit where it's due that Jake was actually there for all of that.
Really?
But I think that was the last time I saw him. I did speak to him just a few years ago. A friend of mine was at Guitar Center purchasing strings for his impending bachelor party, and he spotted Jake and he called me and suggested that I call Guitar Center so that I could talk to my old friend. And of course, I wasn't about to call Guitar Center and ask some guy, "Hey, put Jake E. Lee on the phone,"
sure.
Because I mean, first of all, it wouldn't have worked, and second of all, I wasn't about to embarrass myself or Jake that way. But apparently, somebody called someone, and the phone rang, and Jake was on the other end, and we spoke for a good half hour that day, and that was just a few years ago.
Wow.
If I'm not mistaken, he's now living in Las Vegas. I think he moved, and he had some projects going on over there.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yes, there's another example of a just off-the-charts brilliant guitarist who I was privileged enough to work with.
Your career, you've played with the best of them.
Yep.
You should be really happy when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, I'd like to think that they are equally happy, but no. I get your point. No,
yeah.
I mean, that being said, I'll tell you, I'll bring you another little anecdote. at the funeral on Saturday, which was a private ceremony, this was the day before the actual memorial. And talk about privilege, I was asked to perform at the funeral, to do a couple of musical numbers with accompanying Oni Logan, the singer for Lynch Mob, if you know him. And I was in very, very good company. Among those singing were John Payne from Asia, and Jeff Tate from Queensryche, and saving the best for last, not to cast aspersions at those two extraordinary singers, but Glenn Hughes. And myself and Oni and some other notable players. Scott Warren, from Ronnie's most recent keyboard player, played as well. But I was really, really moved that Wendy had asked me to participate that way. And I don't mind telling you, for a guy who's been playing in front of people since I was 6 years old, playing classical recitals as a kid, as far as I can remember, this was the only time ever I was nervous.
Really?
Because, well, and I couldn't put my finger on why. I mean, I played really in front of the world. The first Dio gig I ever played was Castle Donington in front of 110,000 people. And it was well, walk in the park. It was really absolutely nothing. But to be there in the presence of Ronnie for the last time, I hope I don't get choked up for your audience trying to tell this story. It was surreal. It was a transcendental experience, knowing that when I finished playing the last note of the last song, that would be the last time I would ever play in Ronnie's presence. So that in itself was difficult enough, but for whatever reason, and maybe this speaks to having played my whole life, or maybe having the luxury of listening to Oni's wonderful vocal in front of the keyboards, we pulled it off. We did the first number, were somewhat relieved, did the second number, and just were amazed that, number one, we pulled it off, number two, that it seemed kind of okay, and number three, that it was now behind us.
Mm-hmm.
It was that high of a stress level, but we're talking about waking up and feeling lucky. So we depart the church, and we head on in the processional of, I don't know, there must have been 200 cars. I mean, it was such a tremendous outpouring of emotion and love. Ronnie would have been, and perhaps from beyond was, moved by the presence that appeared in his honor. And we get to the site where the funeral director asked us to gather, and cars are pulling over, and we're parking and walking in that general direction. And I walk up to a guy who I actually thought was Frankie Bonelli, because I had, Frankie, the drummer for
Quiet Riot.
Quiet Riot. Dear old friend of mine, dear old friend of the band's. It was actually Frankie who introduced me to Glenn back in, I don't know, 82 or 81 or whenever, back when we had steam-powered amps and stuff. So I'm standing next to, this guy who I assume is Frankie, and I'm speaking to my wife on my right, and I see a hand coming towards me. So without even turning towards it, I grabbed a hand to shake hands. And next thing I know, the other hand is pulling me towards him. And I'm like, well, I haven't seen Frankie in a while. Okay, we're hugging. And I look up, and it was Tony Iommi. Tony Iommi pulled me into his arms and hugged me, and in my ear said, "You were bloody incredible." I don't mind telling you, at that point in time, I was 11 years old again, in my room, listening to my first Sabbath record, just in disbelief. Now, I've known Tony for years. I've had the privilege of seeing him from the side of the stage at Sabbath gigs and at Heaven and Hell shows, most recently at the Greek Theater here in Los Angeles last August. And like Ronnie, Tony never disappoints. I mean, to me, he is the embodiment of all things guitar that our genre of music was built upon. Mm-hmm. Granted, there are countless incredible guitarists, and they are each due their credit in their own right. But as far as I'm concerned, Tony laid the first brick in the wall that became heavy metal. And to have him embrace me like that and pay me such a heartfelt, genuine compliment, I felt like Mike Myers in the Wayne's World movie. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. It was just such a transcendental moment for me to aside from, wow, I guess I didn't suck after all, because he didn't have to say that. Tony's not a keyboard guy anyway, but I was just so moved by that generosity and that outpouring from him. I feel lucky for many things, not the least of which is the love of a wonderful woman. But having that punctuate Ronnie's funeral was something I will remember for the rest of my life. Not that I wouldn't remember Ronnie's funeral for the rest of my life anyway, but I mean, against the backdrop of something so tragic and so senseless and so sad, to have actually had an experience which kind of made my heart skip a little bit, that was a real bonus. A real bonus.
So going back to, how does it feel for you waking up in the morning? So, as a musician, that must be like how the other musicians feel in the morning knowing they played with you.
Well, nobody's called to tell me, but I like to think that the relationships that I've established with musicians that I've played with is kind of timeless and has left its mark on other players. I try to maintain relationships with. To me, music is only one facet of the interaction that I try to experience when I'm playing. Mm-hmm. To me, it's more than just the notes that we play. There's a vibe that we share. There's a connection emotionally. There's a connection perhaps spiritually. And by and large, with the notable exception of Jake, the people with whom I've played over the years, I've remained in touch with. And I got a hug from Glenn at the funeral, who said to me that he had forgotten how brilliantly I play and how desperately he wants us to work together again. So maybe that will happen. I don't know. Glenn seems to always think that things will happen, and sometimes they don't. But I'd like to think that the people with whom I've played had a positive experience, and they wake up enriched for the experience.
I'm sure they are.
Would be a worthy goal.
Your name's been up there, and you've did a lot of work for the hearing aid with Ronnie James Dio.
Sure.
That's world famous.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, there's certainly having the world notoriety is a wonderful thing. I don't mean to diminish it in any way, shape, or form. And when I travel, when I'm in Europe, and I happen to be walking on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and a couple of guys do a double take and walk up to me and say, "Hey, don't you play keyboards?" And not only are they surprised when I answer that I do, but when I answer in French and we begin to parlez-vous a little bit, it's a wonderful one. It gives almost a sense of a worldwide family. Because, as Ronnie would have said, the music that we created over the years, people grew up with that music. That affected people's lives at whatever point of their life they were in when they first heard and decided that they would hang a memory on a particular song. So I can only imagine how many people had significant thoughts attached to Rainbow in the Dark or Holy Diver or Last in Line or Mystery or All the Fools Sailed Away there's the one great thing about Dio is, as I said earlier, about the consistency of the material. There was no shortage of wonderful music. I look back at the catalog sometimes, and I am just in awe of the body of work that we created.
The catalog is so immense, and with the hits on it. Not only immense,
but virtually without exception, they're all winners. Virtually every song in its own right has something really special about it. There are some songs, of course, that some people like better than others. I myself have those I favor and those I don't. But in spite of that, they all seem to have stood the test of time, which, of course, is the acid test for any body of art.
And these songs are going to stand the test of time. They're already classics. They were when they were released. Yeah,
that raises another thing too. I don't know if I mentioned, but I've been working on my own project for 10 or 15 years now. It's going to be a solo project.
Okay.
It's a body of material that I've been writing over the years and struggling to find the right singer to, as I was describing Ronnie's ability to have an image of what he wants in a guitar player and know it when he finds it, or having known it when he found it. I similarly have aspirations of finding this embodiment of the singer that I've yet to really nail. And I've worked with many people over the years. Most notably, I was doing something with Robin McCauley for a while, and through Robin's own decision, he didn't feel that he was the right voice for some of the melodies that I had composed. And when I suggested that I could just change the key so he'd be able to sing them, he had the most generous and surprising reaction I had ever witnessed, scolding me for even considering changing anything about such magnificent music. What I need to do is find somebody who's capable of singing it. And this was coming from someone who I held in such, and still do, hold in such high regard, a singer with the pedigree that Robin McCauley has. I mean, let's not forget the Michael Schenker stuff and all of the body of work that he had created.
Mm.
So, maybe this thing with Glenn might work out to be that. There are other singers now who are in the wings that I'm considering. I'm hoping will be interested enough to maybe get their feet wet and see what floats. Because I'm not ready to just sign off and do a mercenary project as so many of my peers have done, where you call in a bunch of guys and you do a bunch of songs, and this guy sings that song and this guy plays guitar on that song, and because those albums are great, and they certainly have very distinctive characteristics and qualities, but I very much would like to emulate the bands that I listened to,
mm-hmm.
the band that I believe Dio was, even though we kind of had a revolving door thing with guitarists. The core of the band, at least for the years that I was in, was obviously Ronnie, Vinny, Jimmy, and myself. And I think we created a very significant and profound canvas upon which the guitar and voice were able to just do their thing. And that's what I would like to create for the material that I've been writing. But to get back to the classic notion, it occurred to me for the first time, I was playing a couple of my tunes for a potential co-producer guy, and he made an amazing comment that it sounded very much to him like Dio material. To this point in time, all of this material only exists in piano form. So for me to play something on piano and have somebody say it sounds like Dio, that's a little bit weird. I mean, it's not like it was, like the intro to Don't Talk to Strangers, for example, which kind of sounds okay on piano, or the intro to Last in Line, which kind of sounds okay on piano. But this was more of a robust, anthemic kind of piece, like a We Rock sort of thing. And I was kind of surprised by that. And as I listened with that in mind, I realized that in no small way, the years that I spent with Ronnie influenced my, certainly my taste, but probably also my ability to create in that style, with the very broad-shouldered kind of musical movements.
And the structure is following a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, when I acknowledged how astute the observation that this person had made, the only thought which could follow was that, and now Ronnie will never hear this material, at least not through living years. Maybe in the spiritual world. But that's a little bit heartbreaking for me, because I think somewhere in my heart I always was looking forward to the opportunity for Ronnie to hear, what I'd been working on for so many years.
And you have a guitar player also picked out for this stuff? I
have several potentials, because this project has been so extraordinarily delayed and has been postponed time and time again. I think it's going to come down to a question of who has the patience of being willing to wait for me to get off my butt and actually get the stuff recorded. But I have a few guitar players in mind, some people who I think the fans will be very, very happy to hear. One in particular who, I'll give you something kind of to listen to. There's a guitar player by the name of Michael Sanders, who is online with, I believe, a band called One Tribe Nation,
mm-hmm.
who is just an incredible shredder. I don't know if you will hear it in the material he does on his in his band and with his site. But when I heard him play my material for the first time, he executed it better than anyone prior to. He just, I mean, again, it had more to do with just him having a sense of what the music wants to be. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to do with any specific ability or shredding genius. It's just a matter of fitting correctly, you know, kind of like, you know, Duane Allman was a brilliant slide guitarist, and obviously Eric Clapton was and is a brilliant guitarist. I don't think anybody would have predicted that you put the two of them together and you wind up with a song like Layla, where it's Duane Allman who's playing all the slide guitar on the piano outro. I don't know if your listeners knew that or not, or if anybody even listens to Layla anymore.
I think it's listened to. It's a classic, you could say.
Yeah, did you know that was Duane Allman on the...
I knew it was Duane Allman, but I'm sure there's a lot that don't.
I'll tell you, I didn't know that until very recently. Upon watching the DVD called A Life in Music.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not with that.
The name of the gentleman escapes me. Tom. Silly me. Tom is the name of the DVD. And I recommend this to anyone who has even a remote connection to the music industry or music as a passion. The name of the DVD is Tom Dowd. That's TOMDOWD, and the title is A Life in Music. And Tom Dowd was an engineer who became a producer, who worked with pretty much anybody who was anybody, from Aretha Franklin, I guess, in the early 60s. He was the engineer on the many of the Motown sessions, on Respect, on so many of those hits, to Cream sessions, to Allman Brothers sessions, to Leonard Skinner sessions, I mean, you've got to see this DVD. It's just mind-blowing, the number of bands and the amount of music that this gentleman had his thumbprint in.
Tom Dowd, A Life in Music. I got to look for that.
I'm telling you, dude, you're going to thank me for the rest of your life.
It's got to be good then.
It's mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing. He talks about how the first I won't do it justice if I try to paraphrase, but he's the guy who's credited with coming up with the notion of having vertical faders on a mixing console.
Really?
You know, in the studio, probably even in your radio studio, you have faders that you use for your mic levels and such.
Yeah.
Before he found those, they're called linear faders in an electronics catalog, everyone was using rotary faders, which at best you could turn 2, maybe 3 at a time. He was the genius credited with figuring out that, hey, you could put one finger on each of these and move 10 at a time. Of course, that's kind of moot now, since so much of mixing is done in the virtual world and inside a mixing program on a computer. But nevertheless, that's just the tip of the iceberg of the kind of stuff that Tom Dowd was involved with. And he also serendipitously connected with Les Paul, who, of course, as I'm sure you know,
invented the 4-track recorder.
The first multi-track recorder. Yeah. So the two of those guys together, it pretty much defined modern recording as we knew it for probably close to 40 years. That's
an incredible thing when you think of it. Les Paul invented the 4-track recorder, or, a multi-track recorder. Yeah. And, this guy invented...
Well, he discovered, he didn't actually invent the faders. He just discovered them because he was an ex-military guy.
Okay.
An ex-military electronic guy. He was actually involved in the Manhattan Project, if you're familiar with what that is. The Manhattan Project was I believe it must have been like either 1930s or 1940s hush-hush top-secret government project, basically credited with developing the atomic bomb. And, of course, once the war was over and he was no longer associated with that, he went on to resume his college education as a physics student at, I believe, Columbia University in New York. But he already knew post-atomic splitting physics, and now he was going to school to learn pre-atomic splitting physics, which made no sense to him. To go to school to learn something which he already knew from his own personal military experience was now dated and would take 10 years before it became unclassified, he decided he wouldn't pursue his education and got a job working in a studio where basically he was washing out coffee mugs and eventually was positioning microphones. And back in those days, if the mix that you would record wasn't at the level that you wanted it to be, you would tell the saxophone player to stand further away and the string bass player to stand closer to the microphone.
Right, right.
If I'm not mistaken, he was the guy who came up, or one of the guys who originated the idea of using multiple microphones, one for each instrument. I'm telling you, you watch this DVD, and your eyes will not only be opened, but just ripped out of their sockets with information.
I have to. I have to watch this.
To think that two old guys, this Tom Dowd and Les Paul, pretty much created the industry to which I owe personally my craft. It's mind-blowing.
It was funny, you know, Tom Dowd, I've never heard of him, ever.
Yep. It only makes you wonder how many unsung heroes exist who created so many other things that you never hear about, you know?
That is true.
Without doubt, you will find it. I actually stumbled across it on a, it was either like an HBO or a Showtime cable thing. It was actually my wife who spotted it. She said, "Oh, this looks interesting." And I was like kind of kicking and screaming. And she goes, "Well, let's just watch a few minutes and see what it is." And the way it opens up is with Tom sitting behind a recording console at Criteria Studios in Florida, remixing the end of Layla. And that's, to go full circle, that's where I learned that it was Dwayne who played slide guitar on the outro of that song. I'm telling you, it's a must-view DVD for anybody who wants to even pretend to know anything about the music industry. Pretty much everyone I talk to, and I've especially obviously in the last couple of weeks, I've done quite a few interviews since Ronnie's passing. But even amongst my students, and I was working with some guys at Berkeley. Anybody for whom I believe will benefit from seeing this thing, I turn them on to, and I haven't heard yet of anyone who wasn't able to find it. If nothing else, and you could probably even find it easier, but just Amazon.com, I'm sure would be the first place to look. I wouldn't be surprised if there are even clips of it on YouTube. Jason, you're more than welcome. I'm thrilled that you thought to ask me to be included in your interviews, and I'm very, very happy to have been on your show.
No, thank you very much. You're a legend in my eyes, man. You did the thing.
You're very, very generous. And if you're really curious about the project upon which I'm embarking, I invite you and your listeners to visit my website at claudeschnell.com and check the news link. There's lots of entertaining stuff. If nothing else, there are photos that I believe you and your viewers might find entertaining from the years gone by. Lots of Dio photos, and there's actually an interview link with an interview I did on a Dio message board some years back. And we had to cull down the questions quite a bit, but there are some questions that I suspect might be on your listeners' minds as well, regarding working with Ronnie and working with Jake and working with Glenn and how things work in Hollywood and the music industry and stuff.
And like that, you answer the questions?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well that's awesome for the fans.
Yeah, there's like a whole question and answer section. Almost like an FAQ section on other websites, you know. Okay.
Did you ever, collect all the interviews that you appeared on in the past?
For as obsessive as I am, I actually dropped the ball on that one, and I'm kind of glad I did because it would be too time-consuming.
Right.
And in any case, I much like Ronnie, I try to be consistent. And I think I pretty much answer the same questions the same way each time. So
yeah,
every interview is pretty much a repeat of a previous one, just with newer data, you know.
Very well, it's good. To find some unreleased interviews would be cool.
Yeah, that I wouldn't even know where to start looking for that.
Yeah, someday they'll pop up, I'm sure, on the internet.
I'm sure, but if you're so inclined, knock yourself out, see what you can find. I'd be anxious to hear about that.
Well, I'll let you know if I find anything ever, and surely email you back regarding Tom Dowd, because this is intriguing.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to be as high of an anticipation as you may have. I'm sure you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
I will, guaranteed. And
I mean, you're going to sit there, and at the end of it, you're going to go, "It's over," and it's like an hour and a half or something. It feels like 20 minutes. it's just so engrossing.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and
You're very, very
helping
welcome, my friend.
spreading the stories and the good stuff, your knowledge. It's incredible.
Yeah, if any of your listeners have any specific questions that we haven't touched upon, they're welcome to email me at the website as well, or if you want to do something and collect questions from your I don't have the time to answer countless questions. If there's something we can keep the lines of communication open if you'd like to. Yeah, you're very, very welcome again, Jason.
Well, you get ready to rock and roll.
We rock.
All right, we rock.
Thank you, my friend.
Yes.
All the best. You take care.
You too. Have a good one.
Cheers. Bye-bye.